I am much more surprised to be here today than you are. Уважаемые коллеги, дорогие наши студенты, that's all the Russian I'm going to try today. I really am honored and surprised and excited to be here today. I come to you less, I'm going to step away from the mic, you give me a signal if I'm too far. I'm picturing today's event less as a distinguished kind of a lecture and more that I'd like to share a little bit of my story with you, because so many of us who find ourselves drawn to studies in the humanities and some of these majors focusing on languages and literatures and cultures of the world, we face a difficult question, and it's not a question that comes on a final exam. It's not a question that we have to write in the testing center. It's not an essay. It's the inevitable question at every family gathering. So, what are you going to do with that? And I would like to give you the end from the beginning in case you drop off during our talk today. I had no idea. I had no idea. And some days I still have no idea what I'm going to do with this. But nothing has impacted my life, nothing has changed my life, nothing has opened as many doors for me as my interactions with Russian literature, Russian language, and Russian culture over the years. And so, if you'll indulge me for a minute, I'd like to share just a little bit of how I got here, and then a few thoughts on your exciting and sometimes precarious position as you're in your undergraduate years here at BYU. And then we'll think together about how we might bring those two things together. My interaction, can you see that well enough? Oh, this will help me a little bit with my comments. How many declared Russian majors do we have in the room? Prospective Russian majors in the room? People with some contact with the Russian language and culture in the room? People with some contact with Arabic language and culture in the room? Alhamdulillah. I'm glad that you said I didn't ask for that. This, again, the end from the beginning. So the image here that we have on the title slide, half of you can read half of what's there, and half of you can read the other half of what's there, and a few of us can read all of it. This is one of the treasures that I found during one of my research stints in Palestine, in Nazareth. And you can see up there at the top, right, in Wyborneye Slovo, and down here, Rusko-Arabsky Slovo, Khalil Stepan. Khalil Stepan is the Russian name that a Palestinian intellectual named Khalil Baidis took for himself as he passed through the Russian schools in Palestine in the early 20th century. This was a network of schools that was established by the Imperial Orthodox Palestine Society in 1882 to educate Arabs living in the Ottoman Empire, in this part of the Ottoman Empire. And it was kind of like so many things, a combination of a true philanthropic humanitarian gesture looking to educate and to spread knowledge and culture and education, and an attempt at a colonial foothold, establishing a colonial foothold in the rapidly declining Ottoman Empire. The Russian Empire decided, hey, we want to be part of this game as things unfold. And the best method that they found to do that was establishing this network of schools. And so Khalil Baidis passed through these schools, graduated, went on to become an important educator in Palestine, went on to become an important intellectual. He translated many works of Russian literature into Arabic. He taught whole generations of Palestinians who went on to be leading journalists, intellectuals, authors, literary figures. And it all goes back to this unexpected connection that we had this well-established network of Russian schools teaching Arabs in Arabic and in Russian. And a lot of my research focuses on some of the unintended and unexpected consequences of this intersection between Russian culture and Arab culture. But we get ahead of ourselves. My interaction with Russian started much, much earlier. Growing up in the 80s and 90s in Colorado, the Soviet Union was still a part of our conversation. My dad, I can't explain it any other way than he had a thing. He had a thing for the Soviet Union. Somehow, at the dinner table, we often found ourselves talking about it. I remember so vividly in junior high, reading the newspaper every morning. This is when the first coup happened and when things were starting to unravel and things were starting to change really rapidly. And it was a curious mixture of excitement and a little bit of fear, a little bit of uncertainty. Somehow it felt very close in our family, and I credit my dad for that. But when I went to high school the next year, I found out that our high school, through some vestigial trace of Cold War ACTR programs, offered Russian. And I thought, well, Russian, that's cool. I'm going to do that. And I started studying Russian my freshman year of high school on a whim because it was there. Through that opportunity, I found myself during my sophomore year living in Tula, Russia, with a Russian family as an exchange student. And there's a lot that could be said there. It opened my eyes to the world. I saw things that I had never imagined up to that point. These were interesting years to be in Russia, just so soon after the fall of the Soviet Union. Things were still changing very rapidly. Things were still unsure. So you can see me here with one of the host families that I lived with in Russia, and they decorated me with several Soviet medals. Distinguished. But I wasn't the only person on this trip. If you look closely in this photo, you may spot someone familiar, particularly if you're sitting on this side of the room, particularly if you're sitting in the back of the room. I had the chance during my senior year of high school to go back to Russia a second time. We lived in Ryazan that time and participated in some cultural events, some cultural events in Moscow and then in Ryazan. And if you look up at the top of the photo, you'll see that unbeknownst to me, one of the chaperones on this trip was none other than our own Professor Grant Lundberg. And we didn't find out until I think the very end of that trip that we were both Aliyahs and out there together. What are the chances? The world is small. When I had these opportunities during high school, as I mentioned before, it just, all of a sudden the whole world looked different. I went back to my home in Colorado and the grocery store looked different. And my friends looked different. And high school looked different. And I am so grateful for that chance. Everybody who's here in this room is here because you've had some opportunities and made some decisions that you made on purpose. Nobody studies Russian here at BYU because it's required. Nobody studies Arabic here at BYU because they have to. You're here because you've had certain experiences. Maybe it was an impression, maybe it was an interaction with another person, maybe it was an opportunity to travel. Whatever it was, you came out of that experience and you said, I think I need to study Russian. And the moral of the story that I hope we can arrive at in our conversation today is hold on to that impression. This is a difficult language. This is a difficult time to be studying Russian. This is a curious and confusing set of circumstances in which to be studying Russian culture, Russian language, and different things. But those impressions and those kinds of decisions, those experiences that you have, there is nothing that's more precious. And so even when it's tough, even when somebody is trying to explain Russian morphology to, even when you have to memorize yet another poem for Raisa Wolfovna's class, and you're a little bit scared, please do it, because they'll stay with you forever. I still, in one version of this talk, I was going to break into reciting some poetry here, but I'm not. Those things stay with you. When I reflect on my time here at BYU, studying Russian literature with Gary Browning and with Raisa Wolfovna, I think back to the ways that those classes and experiences changed my life. Standing and reciting Pushkin, it stays in my heart, and it has changed me forever, for the better. But that doesn't answer the question, what are you going to do with that? Step one is change your heart. We know this from going to Sunday school, we know this. Step one is change your heart, but it's not the last step, right? First you let your heart change, and then you take that and you go and do something. So what did I end up doing? I ended up looking for some ways that I could continue to expand my world. I have written in my journal, I have some passages on the flight home from Russia the second time, where I wrote, I want my world to stay big, and I want it to get bigger. I don't want to live my life get small again. Shortly after I returned from Russia, graduated from high school, I had the opportunity to serve a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I was called to serve in eastern Ukraine. I served my whole mission in Kharkiv, a city up on the border with Russia. And my world got bigger. I need to save some of that part for another time. My world got bigger. I returned from, well, it was on my mission that I had my first interactions with Arabic. The city of Kharkiv is a university city, several notable universities, and in one of the areas that I served in, we taught a large number of students. We taught students from West Africa, from East Africa. We taught students from Iran, from Jordan, from Egypt. And in those interactions, I remember one night sitting in the apartment, leafing through an Arabic copy of the Book of Mormon. And I thought to myself, I want my world to get bigger. When I get home, I'm going to learn this so that someday I can read this. And so when I came back to BYU, I started studying Arabic, enrolled in my first 101 Arabic class. And I just loved it, right from the beginning. It was so hard. It was so wonderful. So from that moment on, the Russian continued, because this is right in the moment. We were doing 20th century Russian literature with Raisa Wolfovna, and my mind was just on fire. The poetry we were reading, it changed me. And at the same time, I'm taking my first steps in Arabic, and it started to become clear to me, I might have to choose. I might not be able to keep doing both of these things the way that I have been. And so my wife and I, we got married in December of 2000, and in March of 2001, we got on an airplane, and we flew to Damascus. We didn't actually fly to Damascus. We flew to Istanbul, and we got on a bus. And we took the bus from Istanbul to Damascus. And if you look at a map on your phone right now, you'll see that's not a short ride. So if anyone ever tells you it's a good idea to take a bus from Istanbul to Damascus, they're not your friend. But we spent that summer in Damascus, and we knew that we needed to live there so that we could answer the question, as we look at our lives going forward, do we want to spend the rest of our life living and working in the Middle East or living and working in Russia? And it was a hard decision. But by the end of that summer, the hard decision had become really clear. Damascus changed our hearts. The relationships and the experiences that we had there changed everything forever. So we came home. I applied to grad school. I applied to programs in both Russian literature and Arabic literature. But when the time came and I had to choose, I chose Arabic. But I chose Arabic in a way that let me keep my Russian alive and keep it part of my life. I showed you the slides there at the beginning. Can we dim the lights for just a second so that I can show these to you? So here's another fun exercise in handwriting. Some people in this world have the most incredible handwriting. And do you ever have professors who talk to you about dead people like those dead people are their friends? It happened. This is one of my friends. His name is Salim Kubain. He was also a graduate of the Russian Orthodox schools in Palestine, lived in exile in Egypt most of his life. And so you can see his mailing address is coming from Cairo. But look at that beautiful penmanship. And so what do we notice? He starts out his letter. Дорогой друг, Игнатий Юльянович, давно не получил вас, and away he goes. And then he gets a little bit tired of that, and he switches. And he says, okay, salam, ahlam, wa tahiyat, wa ba'd. And away he goes. This is how I spend my time. Everywhere that I've gone, I've looked for places where these interests intersect. And for me, it has mostly been an academic venture because I was always drawn to teaching. I knew I wanted to be at the university. This was a comfortable place for me. But this impulse to look for intersections, look for ways that your unique experiences and expertise and abilities and skills in the languages and cultures that you've had the chance and the opportunity to interact with, if you watch for ways that they can come together in your life, you'll be amazed at what you see. This is a nice letter. Look at that handwriting. أما بعد التحيات والسلام فقد أخذت كتابكم الكريم رقم 17. And he goes, but then look at this. He's riding along and he's like, oh yeah, Kapitanskaya дочка, Taras Bodva, Knyaz Verebrin, Chekhov. And this is, I found this world. I can't tell you how happy I was when I found this world. So what are you going to do with that? What are you going to do with that? Look for your space. Find these spaces where the unique experiences and background and interests and energies and enthusiasms that you have intersect with your Russian in ways that make them just unique. It might open job opportunities. It might open opportunities for friendship. It might open opportunities for service. It might just open opportunities to be a better person. And we need better people everywhere. Just to wrap up here, and then I'd love it if we maybe had some conversations, some questions back and forth so we could talk a little bit. But let me just share a few anecdotes with you, a few moments from my life where this Russian experience has bubbled up to the surface and touched me and touched the people around me in ways I never anticipated. I did most of my graduate work at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and after we had been there a few years, PhD programs in the humanities can be long. After we had been there 4 years, we had some new neighbors move in next door. And I was kind of listening as they were moving in, and I thought, yeah, it is. That's Russian.
Vlad and Natasha were our new neighbors next door. They lived next door for 4 years while she finished a PhD. It took me a lot more than 4 years to finish my PhD. They lived next door to us for 4 years. We watched their kids grow up. Our kids grew up together with their kids. Immediately, the fact that I had some Russian and was able to connect with them, it made their move so much easier. We grew to be close friends and had lots of adventures and hijinks together. Perhaps most notably when Vlad got the idea to build a banya in the forest behind our apartment complex. And I looked at him and I was like, Vlad, I think we might be breaking some rules. And I said, no. And so they did. We built our little banya. We built a fire out there. We boiled some water. We hit each other. It was great. That relationship couldn't have happened. My Arabic students hear me say this all the time. Study your language. Get good at your language. Become an expert. But never forget that language only becomes meaningful when it's between two people. And so as you continue to invest in your Russian language skills, make sure that you find opportunities to get your language between yourself and another person. That's what it's for. One other moment, and this will maybe be the last, and then we can switch to some questions. Several years ago, I was in Washington, D.C. for a conference. And in the evening after I had given my presentation, I had some time, and I'm a walker. When I have time, I don't want to hang out at the hotel and talk to people. I walk. So I was walking through Washington, D.C., and we had lived there for a few years while I was at Georgetown, and so it was familiar. It felt good to be back home in a way. It felt good that we didn't live there anymore in another way. But I'm walking. I come around this corner. And in Washington, D.C., there is a monument to the Ukrainian poet Taras Shevchenko. I didn't know this, but I came around a corner and I see a statue there. And I had to do a double take because I thought, wait, am I back in Ukraine? In Kharkiv, there's a giant statue of Shevchenko in the main square downtown. And I came around and I thought, that really is Shevchenko. And it was dark, it was evening. But I walked around, there's a little park there, a little green space, and I sat on a bench for a while and thought about Ukraine, thought about my friends. And all of a sudden, again, the same as when Vlad and Natasha moved in, my ear pricks up because I hear some Ukrainian coming from the other side of the square. And I thought, surely, how is this even happening? But I got up and I walked around, and there was a mother and her daughter standing there. And they were trying to organize themselves to take a proper selfie with the Shevchenko statue. And I got up my courage and I approached them in my broken Ukrainian. And I said, oh, can I help? Can I take a picture for you? And she looked at me and she said, how are you speaking Ukrainian? And I said, well, I lived there for a while. I kind of love Ukraine. And so I took a photo and we stood and we talked, and they had just recently come across, they had just recently gotten out of Ukraine and made it to the United States, and they were trying to get organized, and we sat and we talked for a while, and then she just looked at me and she said, why can you do this? What's happening here? And I said, well, that wasn't the first question. Can I back up? If I'm going to be a distinguished alumnus, can I show off a little bit? She looked at me and she said, wait, you speak some Ukrainian? I was like, yeah. And she said, well, who's this? And she pointed to the statue. I said, well, that's Shevchenko. And she said, okay, so you know it's Shevchenko. You read that. And I said, no, I know Shevchenko. And she said, you know Shevchenko? And I said, Як умру, то поховайте мене на могилі серед степу широкого на Вкраїні милі. And she looked at me and she said, oh. And then we sat and we talked. And I am so grateful that even though I've arrived at a stage in my life where I can't travel irresponsibly like I could when I had no children or family to provide for or a full-time job, my world hasn't gotten smaller. My world stays big. because the languages and the cultures and the experiences that have changed my heart stay with me. Thank you so much for the chance to talk with you today. You're doing great things. Don't quit.